Right, thanks folks. I think what is interesting about having a meeting now, 2 years on, is that things look very different, don't they? 2 years ago, the newspapers and the media were full of the celebration of the Arab Spring, the celebration of the revolutions, and everybody was behind them. They were against dictatorships, they were against autocracy. There was a sense of, the mainstream press celebrating this and saying what a wonderful movements they were. 2 years on, things look different, and this is really what Party Tonight is about. It's more complicated. That there is a situation where it isn't the sense of just, we, as many of us here, revolutionary socialists, understand the process of revolution. It's not an event. It's not one night. It isn't just the downfall of Mubarak or the downfall of Ben Ali. It's a process, and that process is working its way through Egyptian society in a way that, like all of revolutionary events, this is not just a linear thing. There isn't just going to be incremental changes ever going forward until, finally, suddenly it's a socialist society. This is a process which will have its retreats, its defeats, as well as its leaps forward. A process doesn't just mean a continuum. It means there is also sharp breaks and moments, significant moments, that drive the revolution forward. And I think that when you look, what is most fascinating about the demonstrations that have been taking place and the protests since the anniversary is seeing the same slogans that were used against Mubarak being used against Morsi. And this tells you something about the process, doesn't it? The idea that actually those that say, and it was coined by, Phil's got it in his article in the journal, I think originally coined by Marine Le Pen, the idea of the Arab Spring has turned into the Islamist winter. But that sense of it being written off, the revolution is no longer going forward. It's now just being in the grip of Islamism. It's now being completely defeated, crushed, or hijacked in some way. The fact is, this is what the slogan is. People have not given up the idea of the revolutionary change they originally came out in the streets for. People demand the removal of the regime, the translation that was famously put in the big banner in Tahrir Square during the 18 days. I remember when it was being painted in the ground, I couldn't make out what it said. It was so big on the floor of the square, trying to squeeze through. But that was the translation they chose of the slogan in Arabic, and that's the slogan that's gone through to this very day about the Muslim Brotherhood president that has been elected from the revolution. And I think that the other side of the commentary, if you like, on the revolutions and the process came from the likes of Paul Mason in yesterday's G2. I don't know how many people saw it. I mean, this is a man who has finally decided that what we're looking at, I'm confident enough now to call it a revolution, 2 years on. So, that's very grateful, aren't we? I'm sure the Egyptians are, that they've finally accepted it. But he also goes on to say the protester may have made it onto the cover of Time magazine, but not a single protest has yet achieved its aim. I think Mubarak might not agree with that, but the fact is, this is the sense, isn't it, of a commentary on where the revolutions are at and where the process is at, this sort of denial, if you like, that they actually are bringing real change in society. And I think that what's interesting about how this has evolved over the last 6 months or so is the sense in the latter end of 2012, the explosion of more protests, the explosion of popular protests, and it's the Egyptian Centre for Economic and Social Rights has done some of the figures in saying that nearly 4,000 protests in the latter half of 2012, and it talks about the different sorts of things that have happened, and this is obviously under Morsi, under the Brotherhood president, where there has been 30 cases of holding an official hostage in his office once every 10 days, 64 incidents of storming an official's office once every 5 days, and more than 561 incidents of road blocking by ordinary citizens about twice a day. So that sense of popular protest is still ongoing, shows that the speed of disillusionment with a new government, a new president put in place by the revolution, if you like, is astonishing, the speed, and those that write it off are making a very big mistake. And I think that, when you look at it, I want to look at, really for us as socialists, looking at what needs to happen, what other things are going on in terms of this process. And one of the things that I think is most obvious in the last couple of months is really the role of the state in the revolution, the fact that the state is still intact. The fact that it's not just all the little Mubaraks that are still rooted in all sorts of institutions in Egypt, but the fact that Morsi presides over the same state that actually imprisoned and tortured and repressed the Brotherhood when they were underground and illegal, but actually he is still presiding over that state. And let's remember, the revolution began on Police Day, the day to celebrate the police, and actually forevermore it's going to be celebrated as a day of revolution that actually saw police stations burned to the ground and eradicated, if you like, across Egypt. And this second anniversary has seen that happen again, has seen police stations, has seen the state being targeted as the people who are blocking the revolution, as the people who are actually trying to crush the revolution. And this is the thing that time and time again people tell you in the street of, we wanted more than just to change the faces at the top. And in fact, some of the people at the top are the exact same faces. They haven't actually changed. But that sense of actually some new faces, but the state very much being in control. And the police are back. The police are trying to reassert themselves in Egyptian society. And this is something that actually seeing people target police stations again is a sense of recognition by the revolution of the role of the state. And that actually while Mubarak's state remains intact, it is something that is going to hold back the revolution. And remember, it's something that we've always said. I mean, Marx learned it after the Paris Commune, that you can't just lay hold of the instrument of the state to use in the interest of the majority. The state is not some independent force that just upholds whoever happens to be elected. It is a force that's utterly there, whose sole purpose is to uphold the power and the wealth of an elite ruling class. And this is what it's doing today. Different representatives of the ruling class, but actually Morsi wants to block any further development of the revolution. He wants to have a stable capitalism in Egypt for which the people of his class can continue to flourish. And therefore that sense of the state playing that role is writ large. And this isn't something that Egyptian workers and protesters have to read Lenin or Marx to understand. It is something that the process of revolution actually raises that level of political consciousness to understand this is the role of the state. And so this is the contradiction, if you like, that is faced, where the Brotherhood reside over a state that imprisoned them, and they are only in power or in office because of a revolution, but now they want to stop the revolution going any further. And, actually the repression just even over the last few weeks has shown that this isn't a different sort of softer, more fluffy state. We've seen the the guy who died of torture. We've seen the older man dragged naked through the streets and being beaten by the police. And we have seen, I think it's over 50 people being killed since the second anniversary took place. So this is, and the imposition of a curfew, which, it was wonderful to see some of the sort of imagination and of people defying the curfew. We were saying about the football matches outside the government building after 9 o'clock, when the imposition of the curfew was meant to start. More people come out in the streets than were out in the streets before the curfew. So that sense of defiance. But these have echoes of things that happened in the build-up in the 18 days before Mubarak. So we constantly see this process at the bottom of society to challenge. And I think that sense of the role of the state also came through in people's attitudes towards the Constitution, which the referendum happened just before Christmas, because that sense of what the Constitution was trying to do was try to entrench the power of the state as it stood, entrench the power of the military still to play its role in society, both in terms of state security, but also in terms of its commercial and business interests, which are phenomenal and something that is not really something that we can sort of ever see. We've not seen this in Britain. This isn't something that we'd be familiar with, but that sense of the military's power being entrenched by a government put in by a revolution is something that millions of people wanted to reject, and came through constantly about the revolution was fighting for democracy, real democracy, and not a sense of a new dictator. And obviously, the thing about Egypt doesn't need a new pharaoh, or lots of the slogans and graffiti on the walls. But I think what's interesting about the Constitution was that sense of betrayal by many people. Now, the Constitution, the referendum won. Let's not pretend that it didn't. He managed to drive it through with a lower turnout than the other elections that had happened since the revolution. But that sense, but let's note the places that rejected the referendum, rejected the Constitution, was the Cairo, the great revolutionary city of Cairo, the capital, and other areas which included Mahala, where the workers have historically taken amazing strikes and been part of leading the movement. So I think that sense of understanding where the heart of the revolution has been driven by the urban centres, by the cities, by where the concentration of workers in the population, and actually in rural areas where actually the ripples of revolution have reached in many places, but have not reached the intensity of in the urban cities. And I think that gap shows you why the Constitution was driven through. But those issues of democracy coming through all the time and challenging what Mercy was trying to do with his extra powers. This feeds into, as with any revolutionary situation or even just any great social upheaval, the political demands for democracy and representation and elections feeding into the social demands for economic equality, for the idea that these people are self-serving, these people just want what's good for themselves, and actually that sense of inequality which will come out in the other talks this evening. And I think this idea that bread, freedom and social justice, the slogans of the revolution, if you like, utterly cannot be separated. There isn't a sense of this revolution can deliver on democracy and elections, but can't deliver on the social issues of bread, of inequality. I think what we can see is a situation where Mercy cannot deliver these things in the present circumstances without the revolution being, the revolution will have to go further forward if those are going to be delivered. He wants to maintain the ability to be able to deal with the West, to get the loans, and I know Phil will talk about the economic situation, but that sense of him being caught, that if he's going to maintain and entrench his power, he's got to go into the attack on people's conditions, when actually the revolution was about people improving their lives. The people, would say to you, look, we didn't have a revolution for this. People's lives haven't changed. The slogans, the placards that people hold, there is no dignity for a hungry man. This sense of actually what people went out and fought for has not been delivered. And I think the final thing I wanted to say was really about, and this came through also in the referendum vote, was really that actually you saw a resurgence of the involvement of women in the revolution around the campaign, around the Constitution, because actually women were central to the 18 days. I've talked in various meetings and there's been loads of things written about the centrality of that, how Tahrir Square for 18 days there wasn't sexual harassment. Women felt safe. Women could stay the night in their thousands, night after night, with thousands of strangers and feel utterly safe. This is not the situation today, and people will have seen, Wasim tells me there was, 20,000?
10,000.
10,000 people marched yesterday against sexual harassment. People would have seen some of the pictures of women with knives and all the rest of it. But that sense of actually women refusing to be intimidated out of the streets, women being refused. And when I went and interviewed people on the queues to vote in the referendum before Christmas, people were joking that the women's queues were the no queues. That sense of actually feeling that the Constitution was actually going to be detrimental to the fight for women's rights, or the fight for equality, was absolutely tangible. And let's remember, these queues, this was not the case that it was non-Muslims or it was just secular women voting no, not at all. It was lots and lots of women voting no. This idea that this is an argument between the secular left who want a lovely revolution and the Muslim activists who just want to have mercy and the brotherhood, this is a false polarisation, which I know will be expanded by others here today. But I think the sense that there is a targeting of women, a targeting of women protesters by thugs who have been sponsored to try to break women from the revolution. We know, we've always said, haven't we, that actually for any revolution to be successful, women have to be a part of it. Women have to be able to fight for their rights. And actually to target women in some of the most brutal sexual assaults that people have seen in Tahrir Square and the surrounding areas, I think people, anybody who's read them, it's utterly shocking. And I think the sense that women are refusing to accept this. One of the revolutionary socialists who wrote a report for us for Socialist Worker talked about the Shubra March on the anniversary of the second anniversary of the revolution, where the women made up more than a third of marches, a really good percentage. And she said the slogan we heard a lot was, women's voices aren't shameful, women's voices are a revolution. And that sense, if you like, of this being, of the recent struggles, bringing this argument, if you like, this part of the revolution back to the fore, I think is absolutely fascinating, and it's a vital part of how this process will go forward. And I think, to finish, I think that for for revolutionaries to try to understand everything that we sort of read about in books and in meetings and things about what revolutions look like have been transformed by the reality of watching one in process. This isn't one that we're looking back and we can understand the significance of every moment now. We will only really understand the significance of some of these moments in the future years. Which was the real turning point? What was a qualitative shift? What really meant that the thing drove forward? But I think for us to try to link both our theory and understanding of revolutions in the past and then thinking about how does that work in Egypt so that we can fight against the Paul Masons and the right-wing commentators and even those on the left who say it's all over because there's an Islamist president. We have to be able to engage and fight against that because it undermines, those attitudes, those views, if you like, undermine and patronize, if you like, a movement of the mass of ordinary people who are fighting for their very lives. Let's remember, this isn't a game. This isn't something that people are just sitting on the edges. This isn't a game. The young revolutionary socialist Ahmed Sami, who was shot dead, shot in the head by a sniper when he was trying to take a photograph and was there reporting for the socialists, the revolutionary paper of the revolutionary socialists in Port Said. This is what it's, the stakes are high here. The stakes are high in terms of individuals and the stakes are high in terms of actually the world is watching, isn't it? We say that what happens in Egypt actually not just has an impact on the region, but has an impact everywhere. And I think we are really only looking at the opening stages, the opening scenes of this revolution. And I think it's brilliant there's so many people here tonight. And I hope from tonight we'll go out better armed to address the questions and debates that there is on the left in Britain. All the better to give our own solidarity here in terms of fighting our own government, to give the best solidarity we can to those revolutionaries in Egypt. Thank you.